thank you all of those who came here to think and talk and discuss the problem or the issue of the importance of impact investing for Israel. I would like to thank also the Milken Institute, the Israel Center, for allowing this roundtable. And I would start with some definitions for the sake of the discussion. Because there have been many seats by which we discussed impact investment, but for the sake of this roundtable, let's start with slide 3, please. Impact investing is an investing that has twofolds, meaning further strategic philanthropic goals and have alongside financial gains. This is the main issue. We can divide it along the ratio of different investors and the risk aversion or the idea of social input more than financial gains. And I would like to show the ratio, slides 15, please. Well, we have learned on impact investment mainly from the US. After this came England with a special social task force of Sir Ronald Cohen. But the birth of the idea of impact investment came from the States, being an important tool to the American philanthropic world as it increases philanthropic impact by enabling the use of foundation endowments monies alongside traditional grant money to achieve greater social impact alongside financial returns. This idea of impact investment that we will further on in slides 4, please, combines investment in grant dollars and increases the philanthropist impact by funds being recycled, leveraged, in order to enable more funds to reach social grant, leveraging funds to attract additional market capital. This is essential to the development of new funds, alongside leveraging also government grant loans, etc. All together in order to enable organizations to engage in long-term planning. This is the American scene we saw when we started to investigate the idea of impact investment. And we were asking ourselves, why is it so important to the Israeli scene? So here we have our distinguished panelists, friends, and also I would like you to participate in the discussion later if you'll be interested. And the idea is how to develop social investment in the Israeli scene. Why is it so special? What's so special about the Israeli scene that differs it from the American scene, and that put another importance to impact investment? If I can allow myself to say, it's even more important to the Israeli scene than to the American scene. And the main reason for it is that we do not have in Israel foundations at all. Very few foundations exist in the Israeli market. Therefore, the endowments that are used for impact investment in America do not exist as such within the philanthropic community, the small and young philanthropic community of Israeli leaders. So impact investment is essential to all actors in the Israeli economy and the social field to engage themselves in enabling more funds to find a solution for social problems. Do we have social problems in Israel? Of course we do. Not only we do have social problems, but the economy being prosperity, we having some nice prosperity in the recent years, social and economic problems also have evolved and attract more attention by the Israeli public as asking for a solution to those problems. Now, solutions needs monies, and there is no sufficient money, neither in the government budget nor in the existing philanthropic Israeli scene to tackle and enable solutions for social problems. There is a need for a new approach that will attract more money and especially will make better use of existing funds by leveraging and combining them with new funds. Can I have slide 7, please? The need for a new approach, as you see, is to achieve all those goals mentioned in the different circles that are presented on this slide. And all of them mean one thing. The old way cannot be sufficient to solve social problems. There is a great need in the Israeli scene, maybe in other countries, but especially as we know it in the Israeli scene, to develop new tools and new approaches. So what is the essence of the new approach? The essence is promoting impact investment, social investment, with the aim of developing and adapting model and solution that actually have been developed in capital markets that were faced with similar issues of scarcity of resources, of limited resources, of need for consolidation, and of funds. Those solutions were developed in the capital markets. Now it's a time to adapt them to the social market. And the idea is such as creation and use of special social funds as part of specific financial model created for financing social goals or for financing in a more efficient way social enterprise. And I would like slide 9, please. The idea of slide 9 is the consolidation of funds and leveraging philanthropic, institutional money, if possible, and other long-term, less risk aversion investors, leveraging their monies, and by joining other potential investors whose risk aversion is bigger, in order to develop more funds, more money, and leverage existing money, in order to all this to make the social enterprise being able to receive more funds, larger amount, focus on impact, local buy-in, and reuse and reform capital. So this is one of the examples. Another one are new financial tools, such as credit enhancement model. If I can have slide 19, please. Slide 19 demonstrate a credit enhancement model that can be used for many social purposes. And we'll talk about it later by our friends here around the table. And also, we can even create regional development that can be illustrated by slide 21. Later, if my friend Stephen Zacher, who helped me so much with those slides, will come, he can develop those things. Most of the important actors are here, sitting around this table. And they can help in different ways creating the social investment scheme. I would also like to present slide 10, please, which shows the importance of intermediaries that are essential to promote social capital markets. So the whole idea is how to create a social capital market for Israel. And I would like now to turn to my dear friends. Each of them biographies are presented in the book, and we'll start by having a lesson from the American scene. Lorin, please.
Thanks, Didi. Thank you, Didi, and thank you to the Milken Institute for putting on actually a whole series of programs over the course of the last few days on impact investing. I think it's a very interesting concept. But before we actually get into tachlis on this, I just want to reflect on a rumor that's been going around that there's a story that's been attributed to Glenn Yago on a very snowy day in Jerusalem, where, and I'm told that it's totally apocryphal, but that Glenn observed that it was so cold that day that he saw a social impact investment fund manager with his hands in his own pockets. At any rate, I was afraid that was going to be a dud, and I was going to have to confess that I'm really not a comedian. But what's interesting is that we have a very new ecosystem that's emerging in the area of the delivery of social services, and in particular today we want to talk about how that relates to the state of Israel and to investors around the world, not just from the Jewish world, but I think from the entire world, who are interested in what's going on in Israel, who see it as really a crucible and a petri dish for what happens in the rest of the world, and where there is a tremendous amount of innovation going on. the issue that we're talking about here really focuses on how value is created in society. And as I think Didi mentioned, Sir Ronald Cohen from the Portland Trust, who is Yaron's boss, who is widely regarded as the father of British venture capital, recently stated that social impact investing is the new venture capital. So I think that's really puts it in context. It really is a revolution in the way that we look at the world of investing. Can we have slide 3, please, again? Just to reiterate what we're really talking about here, in impact investing, and you'll hear it referred to by a number of names. A few years ago, it was being referred to as mission-related investing. Basically, what it amounts to is investing for a profit and at the same time for a desired social impact. And you'll hear it even referred to as double and sometimes even triple bottom line investing. Impact investing today is probably about where venture capital was in the early 1980s, a few years after the Apple IPO. And it's going to take some time for it to make its way into the conservative world of foundations and endowment investing and so on. It really requires a major change in the way those institutions do business and the way that they think about the world. But I think that it's something that has to happen. And I think that it's something that absolutely will happen over time as there are successes that percolate out into the world and that become known to investment managers and to the folks who run these endowments and foundations who generally view themselves as institutional investors in a very traditional sense. There are obstacles which we can get into in more during the general discussion. But the major obstacle is really to simply persuade charitable foundations to accept the revolutionary concept that investments made from the 95% of their assets that they don't have to utilize for qualifying distributions under the tax code, at least here in the United States, and I know that there are similar rules elsewhere in the world. But the money that is not required for them to give out in the form of grants over the course of a given year can also be deployed in a way that not only helps to maintain their operations and to fund those grant programs, but that can also have a return that is consistent with their mission as well. Every institution has, a different mission, a slightly different spin on the way that they prioritize the world and what they're looking to accomplish. So impact investing in a lot of respects is really not something that's new. I mean, in fact, we're going to be talking about Israel bonds here during the course of the panel, and of course many of us around the room have viewed Israel bonds as a personal impact investment strategy to utilize without ever thinking about it, in that type of a context or without that kind of a label. The reviews that are the returns that are necessary in order to make this work. Sir Ronald Cohen again spoke about the fact that his view was that you needed about a 7% return in order to make it viable. That you needed to be able to fund the 5% of qualifying distributions of grants to give out and to maintain the value of the endowment while also funding operations and all of the administrative costs that go into the program. It's important to remember that impact investments are really not a substitute for grants. They're really something to complement grant programs for philanthropies, for foundations, for endowments. To think about it strictly in a Jewish context, an expert in this area, and I don't think anybody actually knows the real number, but a friend of mine, when I was talking to him yesterday, estimated that there are $300 billion sitting in Jewish endowments and foundations around the world. If you think about if those institutions, so 5% of that is about $15 billion that's flowing out into Jewish philanthropies from those institutions every year, including to Israel. If you took an additional 1%, that would be an additional $3 billion flowing into this ecosystem every year dedicated to these socially desirable concerns. So it's a huge potential, and I think that we're just really beginning to tap into it.
Thank you very much, Lorin. And I would like to return the speech, or to start with the Israeli Jewish agency, Alan Hoffmann, which is, I'll call him also the funds and the use of the funds.
Yeah, good morning to everybody. I'm clearly the neophyte at the table. I'm not coming to present new instruments for social impact funding, but over the last year, from the time that Didi Lachman did, I think, this very important piece of research with the Rothschild Foundation, and together with Milken, that showed the importance and the potential of creating new ways of thinking about social impact investing in Israel. We've been engaged with Glenn and with his team in asking for what is today still the biggest NGO in Jewish life that interacts between World Jewry and Israel. How does this new opportunity impact what we're doing, and how can it help engage with some of the issues that we and the Jewish people, acting only philanthropically, have not been able to do in the last few years? So just slide number 41. So slide number 41 just gives, for those people who are not here, a very quick sense of what is the Jewish Agency. 84-year-old organization, actually gave birth to the State of Israel. Ben-Gurion was the head of the agency. We're funded by World Jewry, through those organizations. Current operating budget is $330 million, but with a variety of different non-profit companies that we run in Israel, we get to a consolidated budget in the vicinity of $500 million. Sitting here at the table, actually representing Portland, though, is my friend and colleague Yaron Neudorfer, until very recently was the CFO of the Jewish Agency. The agency operates fundamentally in 4 very big areas, bringing Israel to young Jews around the world and young Jews to Israel, and we're partners in Birthright and Messiah and various things many of you have heard about. Connecting young Jews in Israel through social activism to civil society in Israel and to their Jewish identity. We have a huge part of our work that deals with vulnerable populations. The Jewish Agency created Youth Aliyah even before the creation of the state, and still operates Youth Aliyah villages. And clearly, the historic mission from the very beginning, advancing and facilitating Aliyah. And I think that if you go to slide number 42, what you see, I think, about the agency, and I think one of the reasons it makes us interesting to you, to this conversation, and to this topic, is that, in a sense, we're an ecosystem. We are, on the one hand, we're an organization who is mandated to identify the central issues and challenges facing Israel on behalf of World Jewry, and you have that in the little green box. Aliyah and Klita, Aliyah and absorption, the development of the periphery, poverty and welfare. We act on behalf of World Jewry to try to see how World Jewry can impact in poverty and welfare. And we're also there in terror, in war and crisis, as taking 50,000 kids out of the south during the most recent operation, people who lived who were in shelters, children who'd been in shelters for over 2 and 3 weeks. Now, the one part of the of the ecosystem is identifying the challenges. The second is mobilizing the funders. And the agency works both with World Jewish Philanthropy, the government of Israel, with Israeli philanthropy, and with the Israeli business sector. And I think that part of what we need, or the third part of this in the ecosystem, is providing the solutions of, we operate programs, and the question is, and we support and fund third sector organizations. Part of what we do on behalf of World Jewry is to support and fund third sector organizations. So just to give you a very quick sense of how I think we're involved in all three pieces of the ecology that we're talking about today. If you go to slide 43, as we've heard from Lorin, I think that this organization that was created to be the arm of World Jewry, the agent of World Jewry in building Israel, in those areas that I talked about, we're looking at a generational transition in terms of philanthropy. On the one hand, there's much more Jewish wealth, but much less of Jewish wealth that's going to Jewish causes. Much less of it that's allocated to collective funding, to those annual campaigns that were essentially the basis of the financial support from Israel, whether it was outside of Israel through the outside the United States through Keren Hayesod, the UJA that many people in this room know about and were active in. That notion that you make one gift a year to support Israel and somebody else makes the decision, that world is changing, and the new philanthropist wants to follow his money, and the new philanthropist is not only interested on a philanthropic act that has one impact, but is interested on social return on investment. The new philanthropist would like to see his money maybe acting more than once, twice, or three times, and wants something particularly, I think, as we find big generation of philanthropists who come from the financial sectors. That's the new generation of philanthropy. That's where the new generation of wealth is, are looking for instruments that will make it possible to actually act in the ways that they know how to do best. So you have the social investors looking for social return on investment. And I want to just give an example, one quick example to concretize what I'm talking about. And then I will go to the last slide and kind of open this for the end my opening comments. I don't know whether people, all people in this room know, but one of the huge issues that Israel has dealt with over the last 3 decades has been bringing to Israel Ethiopian immigrants and integrating them into Israeli society. And very soon we will have close to 130,000 Ethiopians living in Israel. Over the last chapter of 250 Ethiopians come from Gondar every single month. It'll end by the end of this year. That will be the end of this last chapter of Ethiopian immigration. Young Ethiopians go into the army. They're close to between 2,000 and 2,200 young Ethiopians go into the army every single year. We have a horrible story because of the cultural issues, people coming from the third world. Over 60% of all young Ethiopians who go into the Israeli army, through their army service, have at least one experience with a military jail. 60% of all Ethiopians will be sent to jail for a short period, could be a week, could be longer, mainly about AWOL. It's got a lot to do with culture. 2 months ago, the 3-star General Orna Barbibai, the highest-ranking woman in the Israeli army, asked to meet with us to talk about, is there something to do with this cohort of 2,200 young Ethiopians who go into the army. I think you have a huge opportunity here. Yaron's going to talk about social investment bonds. I think we're going to hear about the different kinds of instruments. But you have a huge opportunity here. If the government of Israel and if the army were able to develop the mechanisms, which do not yet exist, to quantify and to be able to show you what kind of savings to the budget of the state of Israel, an investment that would be done, this is similar to the famous Portland model for Britain. If we were able to show how a social impact, this is a large-scale project that ultimately would have to be created, I believe that this is a huge opportunity to find the kinds of investors who would come in a project together with the Jewish people, together with the state of Israel, together with the army, to deal with what is currently looks like one of the most intractable issues in Israeli society, bring down the number of young Ethiopians who through the army service land up in army jails. What does the state benefit from this? How can we show this to investors? I think it's a great example of the kind of large-scale kind of work that we're doing. And therefore, on slide 44, and I'll finish, I think that the agency that is called on to try to deal with those kinds of issues, and let me say that one of the things that I said to General Barbibai, I don't think there is at this moment a philanthropic source to be able to take on a program like that. But I think that this is the kind of thing that impact investing would offer a huge opportunity for in the state of Israel. And so I think that the agency that's both this global Jewish table and a philanthropic intermediary, as you see here, and a direct operator of programs, in a sense, we're sitting on the opportunity together with the kind of instruments that need to be built, together with the government of Israel that also has to build the ability to both evaluate and quantify the savings. I think that what you see here is, what I think is the new world of where at least a part of what the Jewish agency should be doing with impact investment in the future.
Thank you very much, Alan. It is most inspiring. Now I would like to turn to Karl Kaplan, who for me is the chalutz of social investment and impact investment in Israel. Because when he started the idea of social investment, nobody understood exactly what you were talking about. But now there is nobody in Israel. I mean, as an Israeli, as being one part of the government, we didn't understand. But now with all the success of Koret Foundation and Keren Koret, I think it's the best example we have in Israel of impact investment. So please, Karl, thank you. I think they told me to use that microphone. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Didi. Boker Tov, good morning to everybody. It's nice to see a lot of old faces and a lot of new faces. The advantage I have is I can talk about tachlis, about real things in the field operating in Israel over the last 20 years. Slide 24, please. Lorin, I think, hit it right on the top of the head. There is no substitute for philanthropy. The question is what you do with it and how you use it, and whether or not, at least for a major part of what you're doing with your philanthropy, you're treating it as if you were investing in a business. Anybody who invests in a business seeks leverage for their money. And what we've been able to do is leverage philanthropy to facilitate the creation of jobs and support of small business and microfinance in Israel. We started 20 years ago. We've facilitated to date over $300 million of financing to small and medium-sized business and microfinance. We've created and supported 50,000 jobs. We've lost $4 million over this time. That's over 20 years. It's not $4 million a year. That's $4 million over 20 years, which represents 1.5% losses of the money that we've guaranteed. We've done over 5,000 microfinance loans, which represents only 5% of the credit we've done. It's a very expensive proposition to do microfinance. We're not Bangladesh, so what you have to spend and what you have to do in order to provide real opportunity in microloans is a very expensive operation. Overall, our entire operation has cost us 4% of the credit we facilitated. which means if we were a private business, our profit before tax would be 96%, and we don't pay tax because we're a nonprofit. Our programs, all of which have been focused on trying to affect niches in the market that aren't being served, and when we started, the entire small business sector was not being served at all in Israel, has been adopted in a number of different versions by a number of different others, including all of the government government programs for small business and intermediate business and export finance are all based on, in one manner, shape, or form, the model we created. Slide 25. By the way, we've managed to raise money by convincing philanthropists that we can effectively use their money. We've done it by grants from public and private institutions, private individuals, private foundations, and in some cases, PRIs, program-related investments, which are a very important part of the American philanthropic scene based on the tax structure here. I think some of you know about them. It's something that we should be focusing on and using more of, because it's a way to maximize the 5% that the private foundations have to give. What do? Very briefly, our programs are, we're now supporting primarily small and medium-sized businesses in the Negev and in the north. Anything that's not between Hadera and Gedera, where there is, I think most people know. It's the center of the part of the country is where almost all the high-tech is, where all the young people want to live, where they all want to work. They want to spend 24/7 in Tel Aviv. The jobs are in the center of the country. There are less jobs available in the north and south. So the idea is to do economic development, to fund businesses, to make it attractive to them, to be able to create jobs and convince young people to leave. More than 40% of all of the indigenous young people, in other words, people from the South who graduate Ben Gurion, leave the South because there is not job opportunity. So that's one of the things we're focusing on. Second of all, by the way, we have an OPIC guarantee. We have a U.S. government overseas private investment guarantee, $10 million second loss guarantee, which gave us great leverage with Bank Leumi and with the Bank of Israel. And our leverage on that program is almost 16 to 1 in terms of the money we have to deposit vis-a-vis the money we can encourage the bank to lend. There is no such thing anywhere as 16 to 1 leverage. We have it. And I think it's important to focus on, I know, David, you'd love 16 to 1 leverage somewhere, wouldn't you? I'm sure. We have a special fund, in addition to the North Fund, which lends to Israeli Arabs, we have a special fund for the Israeli Arab sector, 75,000 small businesses in the Israeli Arab sector, primary employment vehicle for Israeli Arabs. Most of those businesses support 2 and sometimes 3 generations of a family. We're facilitating special credit to them on very attractive terms. It's extremely important that the Israeli Arab sector economically have at least the opportunity to have the same time of economic opportunity as Israeli Jews. We've supported the young entrepreneur programs. We've guaranteed 500-600 loans there. Microfinance is a very, very important element of what we do. It's our estimate, we don't have a figure, maybe Milken can help us find the figure, that at least 70% and maybe more of all Israelis have no opportunity whatsoever to get any form of business credit. The banks control the business credit market. 5 banks control 96% of all the credit. And if you're from the low-income sector or you've had a bad experience with the bank, there's absolutely no way. So we're focusing on all the disadvantaged populations, Orthodox Jews, regular Jews, Bedouins, Arabs, Ethiopians. We have a special program for small loans to Ethiopians. And we're We're trying to leverage as best we can in that sector as well. We have 3 programs quickly, a leverage program with Bank of Poalim up to 30,000 shekels. We have a joint venture now after a program we started. The government came to us and the Prime Minister's office in Tamat said, we want to expand your Bedouin program for all Arab women in the country. So we have a joint program there. We've passed 3,500 loans in that program. The government pays half, which is very nice. So even though we don't get a lot of leverage on the money we put in, we at least have 2-to-1 leverage because the government is paying half. And we're Kiva Israel, which is lending via the internet. I know some of you may be aware of it. We've raised close to $400,000, and we're in discussions with them to give us a loan limit of up to $1 million, which is that. Lastly, what we've tried to do is focus on, as I said, niches that aren't being served, one of which is lending to nonprofits and lending to social investments. If you look, you know the overlap between a for-profit social investment and a nonprofit organization. There's quite a lot of overlap between the two. We've started some pilot lending to these organizations. We are working on setting up a substantial fund with one of the major Israeli banks to be able to facilitate it. And I think it's important, if you take a look now at slide 26, I want to give you one example of what potentially we think we can do with those individuals that are focused on creating social investment funds. Let's just take the example here where somebody's about to raise a fund of $30 million to make social double-line investments. It could be nonprofits, it could be for-profits. If the fund were to lend us on a net basis a small portion of that money, we can then leverage that up at the banks on a 6 or 7-to-1 leverage to create working capital financing for the social investees. By definition, most of those companies or nonprofits are unable or will be unable to get bank working capital financing because they're either new or young or don't have enough demonstrated profit to be able to do it, and banks look askance in Israel on nonprofits to begin with. So what we can do, for example, is if we had a $2 million net loan given to us, we could manage that money, providing working capital via the banks to the invested companies. So in theory, the fund can start off not with 30 million, but maybe 40 million in terms of available capital that can be used. We're going to try it out. There's some initial funds. We're working with Portland Capital and Yaron. We're working with Sir Ronald on opportunities to do that. I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much. And we'll be glad to follow up on anything as we move along.
Thank you very much. And just before I handle it to Mr. Tapoohi, I would like to say that recently, following also last year Financial Innovation Lab and the recommendation of the Israeli Economic Council, the Israeli government has adopted a resolution to create a first government social investing fund based on the model of public-private investment fund, and we'll speak about it later if we'll have some time. So now I would like to handle the microphone, or to let you use your microphone. Izzy Tapoohi, Chairman of the Board, Israel.
Yeah. I would like to approach this particular aspect of presenting Israel bond a bit more in a structured fashion, and then we'll get into some of the issues that have come up, because I've got some very strong ideas about it. But just to give you some very rough initial idea of Israel bonds, we are today selling within the United States around $1 billion. We were, about a year and a half ago, we were around the 600 million, but since then we've revved up the operations and we're selling around $1 billion. We're also taking over now Europe, South America, and Canada, and I'm hoping that to rev up, sales to in the vicinity of between $500 million to $750 million. So there's quite a bit of money flowing in. We've got a tremendous experience of how you actually do it, and I think it's extremely important in this particular session. So if we can start off with number 28. So now, the very act of investing in Israel bonds helps strengthen the Israeli economy. Now, even if an individual or institution invests in Israel bonds purely for a financial consideration, they are still engaged in impact investing by generating economic, social, and confidence-building benefits. So viewed from a social standpoint, this has resulted in tangible benefits for all of the nation's citizens, making Israel bond an overarching impact investment. 29. Uplifting society with infrastructure development. There's no doubt that our proceeds goes to this, from the sale to the state of Israel, to the finance ministry, and they develop all aspects of the economy, enabling, among other projects, national infrastructure, and that is today a globally accepted means of uplifting society. As an historical example, I mean, we can go back and look at that, that always helps. Israel Bonds Capital helped construct the national water carrier, a seminal project that changed Israel from a food importer to an agricultural self-sufficient nation. This was, of course, a transformative project for a society that only a few years prior had experienced government-mandated food rationing. Creating opportunity for society. Today, the building of sophisticated transportation network has eased the way for Israelis to commute to jobs, universities, shopping, entertainment centers, even from the periphery. And we'll go later on into it. As I said, I'm just looking at the structure per se, but you know, there's always the argument, where do you really put industry? Do you put it in the periphery, or do you ensure that you've got the way of getting people into the center where they can work and get better pay and go back and live in the periphery? So we can discuss that a little bit later on. But there's no doubt that that has become an engine of creating meaningful opportunities for all of the Israeli society as such. Now, the other thing, of course, as well, is that we have assisted in the creation of the infrastructure that has led to today's startup nation, which obviously is a big proud factor for all of us. 31. The next factor that I think is very important is the confidence factor, which we sometimes tend to forget about. And the 62-year record of a proven reliability under all circumstances, including security and economic challenge, position Israel bonds as a source of confidence. If, for example, you had an economic or security crisis and Israel would be unable to turn to the capital markets, because a lot of us always talk, oh, well, Israel can always raise money on the capital markets. That would not happen, I guarantee you, if Fitch dropped the rating of the Israeli economy for one reason or another. If you had an economic or security crisis in the Middle East. So there's no doubts that Israel bonds would step up to the challenge. And so that's, from Israel's point of view, the reassurance that the citizens in Israel has, that they've got the accessibility to funds if they would need it, is a very important confidence factor. Creating double benefit, and I think this is probably the most important aspect that applies to all of us when we discuss social impact investment, is the fact that you today can invest in Israel bonds, help the Israeli economy, and yet donate it to any organization that you would like, that would contribute to the social impact within the Israeli society. I mean, for instance, we've got partnerships with Hadassah, various federations, Magen David Adom, and many others. And at the end of the day, you invest in the Israeli bonds, but then specifically indicate where you would like that investment to be given to. So I think that particular vehicle is a tremendous vehicle. It can be utilized specifically where we have got all of the underlying infrastructure to be able to sell a phenomenal amount of Israel bonds, and we could greatly assist. I would even, Glenn has gone out of here and left the room for the moment, but I would even suggest to Glenn that to have an Israel bond that would actually contribute to the Milken Institute as an investment, and they would be able to utilize that in the right areas, I think would definitely be something that one would be able to look at. Now, we've got to remember both the principle and the interest that comes back can be utilized for very important, sources. Now, we are discussing with the Israeli government the possibility of doing earmark bonds, which I think is extremely important. We haven't got to that stage yet because we're concentrating on the international aspect for the moment. But I believe that it can be done for specific areas. And I've got no doubts that when we get to that particular point, I would be more than happy to sit down with the relevant people and see how we can develop that further so that we can all contribute to the social benefit of the Israeli economy and worldwide economy as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Izzy. Now I turn to the last speaker, Yaron Neudorfer, who is the Director of Social Finance Israel. And I would like to ask you, how can we create new tools and new sources of money for impact investment in Israel?
Okay, thank you, Didi. Thank you, Glenn, in your presence and not. I see that my opening remarks will be also my closing remarks for the sake of time. So I want to take you back to the future. And when saying back to the future, I want to give you a piece of recommendation. I'm not sure how many of you have seen the Dan Pallotta TED Talk, and which is very common in social networks in the last month. But basically, he's talking about philanthropy that has gone dead wrong in the way they treat nonprofits, and the need for new business-like approach in nonprofits. Now, a piece of statistics that's interesting, which is given there, is that since between the years of 1970 and 2009, only 144 nonprofits were able to cross the line of $50 million in size, while 47,000 for-profits crossed that line. So we are looking at a situation where nonprofits, we need for them to find a new model that will enable social entrepreneurship to do for nonprofits what VC has done for for-profits. And in this realm, we're trying to develop new financial tools, actually new approaches, in order to be able to give the social entrepreneurs and nonprofits approach to big money and to additional capital. We're talking about a market size of $100 trillion possible for these nonprofits, and while having a stronger social impact. So jumping to slide 34, please. This is what we want to achieve, and we want to do for social investment what venture capital did for business, as I said. I want to talk about this morning about three different vehicles. The first one is what we call social impact bond. Social impact bond is really a new mechanism that is developed 2.5 years ago in the UK. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of how it works and what it does. So if we go to slide 35, we can see how a social impact bond works. Basically, in October of 2010, the first social impact bond was launched by Social Finance UK, our sister company in the UK that was started by Sir Ron Cohen as well. And dealt with prisoner rehabilitation, actually with recidivism. The statistics in the UK showed us, and it's pretty much the same in all Western countries, that around 65% of prisoners under the age of 21 that are being released from jail go back in within a year. It's not very hard to imagine the reasons for this, but it's harder to treat it. Now, when you think about that, this creates heavy expenses for the government. And in trying to resolve this problem, this was the issue of the first social impact bond that was launched. The first bond was launched at the size of £5 million, given from 17 different investors. And we're talking about investors, not philanthropists. A very interesting, by the way, point to you, Lorin, that 12 out of these 17 investors kept it on their balance sheet as an investment and not as a grant giving. So that's something that we may want to explore later a little bit. Then the project, actually the intermediary, social finance, has chosen 4 different service providers, non-profit, to deliver the service for resolving this issue. We're talking about different non-profits. One is dealing with housing, the other one is dealing with employment, and third one is dealing with psychological treatment while still in jail. And the trick here was the collaboration between them. If you know, and I guess most of you do know the world of nonprofits in Israel and worldwide, you know that each one of them is doing what they know how to do, focusing on their mission. They don't know who's operating side by side with them. They don't know who complement them in all the areas around. When you put them all together as a one service around one table, you can give each and every prisoner in that model tailor-made solution that will help them not going to back to jail within the year. So this is a nice story, and now you ask yourself, okay, so we brought investors, we did the good things, where is the return coming from? Now the return is coming from reaching an agreement with the British government simultaneously that for every percent that you reduce from the 65% down, the government creates savings. Part of the saving, half of in this case, is stayed within the government hands, and half of the savings that are created in the government are going back to investors as a return of principal and return on investment. So what we see here, and let's jump for a second to slide 36. What we see here in the social impact bond, we see the following. If you analyze what's happening in the government area, the government is paying only for proven results. Governments around the world do not do it, especially in Israel. In Israel, they give what we call tmichot, support to organizations. You give out the money, you don't know what's happening with it. This is by the way, it's very similar with philanthropy. You give out the money, you think you know what's being done with it, you have some ways to oversee it or not. Some are better, some are more sophisticated, some are less sophisticated, some want more reports, some want less reports, but at the end of the day, you don't know the results and they are not measurable. Here, the government only starts to pay after measurable results were achieved. The risk is transferred from the taxpayer to the investors, and we'll talk about that in a minute. For the nonprofits, this is, I think, the biggest part of the good news. This is the first time that they are not being asked to focus 70% or 60% of their efforts on fundraising, but we come to them, we use tools from the private equity world, and tell them, listen, if you are willing to be measured, or day in, day out, if you are willing to do strategic planning, to put in place information systems that will report internally about how you achieve your goals, we will fund you up front. So we have 2 advantages. First is collaboration that I mentioned earlier. Secondly is the ability to focus 100% of your time on your mission. This is not evident in this field today. Thirdly, and you can read the slide, it's actually an important one. Thirdly, in the investors area, investors reach financial return, they reach social return, and this is the first tool, basically the ties between social performance and financial return. We are developing this in Israel now. If you go back for a second to slide 35, you can see that this generates a lot of interest in the world. You only see a couple of examples here on the screen. I can tell you that the G8 has decided to put social impact bonds on their agenda for the next year. Social impact bonds are being developed in the US. The first social impact bond was dealing also with recidivism, and the main investor was Goldman Sachs. Now, if Goldman Sachs invests in such a vehicle, there is a sign of return there, possible return. Also in Australia, in the UK, where it's all started, there are some 30 different projects in the air worldwide. In Israel,
they're in the air. Hopefully, they will land.
they will. Some have landed already. In Israel, we are going to focus in the first social impact bond on employment for Haredim. The second and the third one, not necessarily in a specific order, will be something that we want to do around diabetes. We work with the Milken Fellows and the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Health on this. And Daniela is in the room, and Reut are very helpful in this. And the third one is around employment for Arabs. We're also looking at recidivism bond as well. So this is one part of an ecosystem that we're trying to create in Israel in order to support what is really sheer, pure social investments. There are two more parts there are many more parts. Most of them are around taxing and regulations that is too boring to tackle this morning. But two more parts, and I see that I have limited time. You see, you fly 17 hours, and then you're left with 1 minute.
I take my tissue.
Yeah. So there are two more parts, and I want to jump to slide number 37 and then 38, Didi. But we need to talk about 37 for a second, because this does exist in many places in the world, and I think that Carl mentioned before, or Didi, you mentioned the government fund. One other part of this whole ecosystem of social investment, social capital market that we're trying to build in Israel is venture funds that will invest in businesses with purpose, with social purposes. It's a matter of definition. The definition is very, very wide. Everyone can decide what a business with a social purpose is. At the end of the day, the tax authorities are the ones that define what is the definition. I want to acknowledge Jordan here that is representing Impact First, which is one of the Israeli funds that are going to invest in social businesses. By the way, this is already up and running in the UK for a couple of years already, since 2002. They have raised now the 6th fund in Bridges Ventures, and they manage over $450 million in assets invested either in the lowest 25% of the economy or in the periphery or in other specific areas such as education and healthcare. The third component for a social capital market, you see there are two components that are the users of the funds, and the third one is something that we're trying to build now in Israel together with Milken and Didi specifically, with the Milken Institute and Didi specifically, and this is a social investment bank. In the UK, they created Big Society Capital. We want to move to slide 38. And we are trying to do this the same in Israel. The social investment bank mandate or charter will be to supply flow of capital to those funds, both the funds that I just mentioned and funds that are doing social impact bonds or fund of funds later in the process. It's interesting just to mention that the capital, the equity of the first social investment bank in the UK are coming from dormant accounts that were dormant over 15 years within banks. They have managed to put up some $1 billion in equity that are going to flow into social needs. So we are talking about $1 billion that are going into this market that is very, very small. And I think this is the right way to create the whole balanced ecosystem. And I'm not going to mention now the role of government, tax authorities, and especially foundations. They need to be able to change the way they do business. They need to be able to move from only grant making into social vehicles, also to take part of the 95%, part of the investment equity that they run, and put it into this kind of vehicles. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yaron. Before we turn to some questions from the table, I would like to say that the task of creating this new world of impact investment is not only the task of the philanthropy or the government, it's also the task of the NGO world and maybe our world, is the measuring issue. Because we all speak about the social impact, but we always want to attract investors to show to their investors that there is a financial gain and a social gain. But how do we measure the social gain? We have measurement ways, we have many ways of measurement for the nonprofit world, whether it's good or not, the AA, the AAA, whatever, but we have to develop some kind of system, whether it's internationally, whether it's nationally, whether it's sectorially, for one sector and for other methods of measurement, and also to invest in developing those things, because without those methods of measurements, we would not be able to show to our investors the double bottom line of which we are talking, unless you have some other solutions. So I would like to ask you, and we have a fellow of the Milken Institute working on it, that's right, Daniela, and we are trying to develop new ways of measuring social input, which is important in order to develop, or essential in order to develop the social impact world. So the question is, where are we going from here? We learned that there are great ideas, and there are new ways, and leveraging and taking all things from financial sector. But what are the steps or solutions that are essential to create this new world of ecosystem, of impact investment in the Israeli scene and as well as otherwise? So I would like to ask if any of you participating in this early hour, which now became a little bit later, 8 o'clock, if you have any ideas and someone wants to ask any questions, or one of the panelists would like to contribute some more insight to the questions I've just raised. Yes, please.
What have been the rates of return for these SIBs so far, the range of the rates of return?
So we're talking about rates of return of between 0, if you don't reach the benchmark that you want to beat, for example, in RIB. Right? It could be -2, but in the first social impact bond, the one that I mentioned, the rate of return is actually, the IRR is going to be around 13.3%. If you go from 65% down to 50% of recidivism within the measurement period. In the Haredi bond that we are developing, we're talking around 13% as well, and this is capped. I mean, the rate of return is basically, can go up to any rate. The more you do, the more return you get, but we cap it at 13.5% because we wanted to still become a social vehicle rather than a way to make big money.
Yes, please present yourself.
Thank you.
Shari Birnbach?
Yes, Shari Birnbach, and I'm now with the African Development Foundation. But my question is a bit about the Israel bonds and a bit about the distribution channels of how it is that you're able to raise the kind of capital that you're raising, and whether or not there's potentially a link between the Israel bonds, obviously, and the Social Investment Bank, because it could well be that there's a match waiting to be made, whether it's through the actual Israel bonds themselves or taking advantage of the distribution channels, because one thing that we've learned is it's bringing these kinds of new instruments to broad market participation that can be part of the challenge.
I definitely agree with you. I mean, we've got an enormous infrastructure. We are a brokerage firm, a little bank, and we've got offices in America around, there's 14 full offices and another 10 sub-offices. It's around 25 offices. By the way, our expenses are around 3%, and they're going down, lower than that as well. So there's no doubts that you can utilize that infrastructure to ensure that we can deal with some of these social impact issues as we go along. But I have to point out a number of issues I think is important, and I might be, heading in the complete wrong direction. I don't believe, and I stated on the table here, that social, we were talking about, for instance, social impacted bonds, on their own are going to do the right work. Listen, if you start talking about social impact with a return, but the investor at the end of the day finds himself after 5 years with a negative return, he will not be there later on. So we've got to be very careful when we apply a business concept to a social impact concept, number one. Number two, I was in the room yesterday, the Leapfrog women gave a presentation and talked about selling insurance in Africa. Tremendous. It really is a tremendous idea, but you have to ensure that you combine that social impact aspect with the business experience of an insurance company. I'll give you an example. I sat on, no, but not quite the right way. I sat on some of the largest insurance companies in Israel. Would we go to Africa? You know how we would go to Africa? If we had one of the groups, such as Leapfrog, sitting down with us and saying, look, fellas, come on, let's go and deal with the social aspect of going into Africa. We, as Leapfrog, will guarantee that if there is ever a loss, we would take on the chin part of it. And I think we would be in that. We've got the infrastructure. We can do it. We can do it so much more efficient than anyone that comes from outside. So I think generally we've got to look much more at the combination of public and private enterprise together. I think that is the right combination. The fact that we talk a lot about these things, we shouldn't forget investment in infrastructure is today perhaps the most important thing around, because a guy who lives down at Beersheba or further on and hasn't got the same opportunity with somebody who lives in Tel Aviv, but can get in every morning because he's got a fast train that takes half an hour and can get a tremendous job, might go back to where he came from, build up a family there, have the right means of ensuring that you uplift the whole society. So we've got to look at all of this aspect and do it together with government, with business, but not on our own.
Philanthropic world.
Yeah. And by the way, one last point that I think is very important. If I were the organizations that were dealing with this whole aspect, I would approach the government and tell them, any industry that is involved in social impact investment of one kind or another, I was the chair of the audit committee of Strauss Elite. We did a lot all over the place. And if there were requirements, and there are nowadays with the requirements of reporting it every year, but if also we had a tax break of 5%, I think we probably would triple and double and triple definitely the investment that we would be doing. So there are many, many aspects here. Let's not look at it in the very narrow way of everything has got to be in the social aspect investment. It has to be a partnership with government and with private enterprise.
Thank you very much, Izzy. And Lorin, you started. Maybe you can end and tell us how to go on.
I think all of us around this table are incredibly bullish about the concept of social impact investing. I think that I'm fascinated by the number of people who showed up. Maybe there was no competition at this hour, but I also think it's very impressive. Absolutely. We were when we were sitting over in the speakers' ready room, we were wondering whether or not we'd be speaking to one another. But I want to also inject a little bit of reality into the discussion, because I think that this is really the wave of the future, and I think that all of us need to be thinking very seriously. I think it's also important for us all to recognize what types of steps have to take place in order for this to really gain momentum and to really become the next venture capital. Just circling back to where we started. Foundations, and I've spent the last 4 years as chairman of the board of the Jewish Community Foundation here in Los Angeles. Marvin Schottland, the CEO, is here in the room. We have about $800 million in assets under management currently, and this is an issue that we have been wrestling with as early as probably 2007. I think we had a program on mission-related investing that we brought to our board to begin thinking about this. We're nowhere, right, in terms of actually getting to the point of actually taking part of our invested assets as opposed to our grant money and focusing on how to deploy that in a socially beneficial methodology. And I think we are viewed around the philanthropic world as one of the more progressive institutions in that regard. We were investing first loss money in Carl Kaplan's fund back in 2006. We've always tried to be very strategic in terms of the leveraging effect of our grant monies. For example, as early funders of the Milken Institute Fellows in Israel, where we see tremendous leveraging opportunities. And we have an Israel bonds portfolio.
Oh, good. I was waiting for that.
And I've served on the board of governors of the Jewish Agency, so I have some personal experience with everybody around the table here, I think. But The reality is that investment committees in foundations are incredibly conservative. They are very, very concerned about the prudent investor rule. They are very concerned about making sure that they have sufficient income that they're generating in order to fund the operations and the grant programs of their organizations. And for the most part, investment folks are very, very uncomfortable setting social priorities for an organization. They need to look to the board. So there needs to be a major step in the philanthropic world that brings the boards and the investment committees together, which usually operate very, very independently of one another, to begin to think about how to reallocate a portion of the investment portfolio in a way that will be consistent with the prudent investor rule, and that will generate the returns. And certainly the returns that Yaron was talking about would be very satisfactory, but have to be viewed on a risk-adjusted basis. And once there is a track record, by the way, that will, we have to have successes in this world in order to generate the momentum that will then turn this into the venture capital of the coming decade.
Okay, so I think now we have 3 more minutes, and Carl Kaplan would like to say one word about track records.
I want to follow up on Lorin's point. A lot of the community-based funds have a lot of donor-directed funding within those funds. And I think one of the things that the foundation management can begin to do is to do something similar to crowdfunding, which is to try and convince a larger number of donor-directed funds to put small amounts of money together for a program support of something that can generate a very nice gift without having to impact negatively on the overall objective of the directed donor. And I think it can be very effective. There is a tremendous, I don't know what the number is, I think, Marv, you probably know best of all, how much Jewish money is, directed giving money is sitting in community foundations around the country that can be put to use, I think, very, very effectively if we do some crowdfunding.
Carl, just a quick anecdote on that regard, specifically what the LA Jewish Community Foundation has been doing, and that I suspect other foundations are beginning to think about doing similar types of things. We've set up what we've called the Center for Design Philanthropy, and it's an organization, it's an institution within our institution that is designed to work, excuse me, with donors who have donor-advised funds. And among other things, not only to help them fulfill their own philanthropic goals, excuse me, but also to help them to find other donors, other investors who have similar objectives, bring them together, and to begin to package those types of collaboratives together, and potentially to help them put together another tranche for another one of your loan vehicles. So these types of things are beginning to percolate up through the ecosystem of philanthropy, but it's a very, very slow process.
Okay, one last word before I try to conclude, if I may, another minute, yes?
Wouldn't it open up the markets an awful lot if you got the big donor-advised funds to create PRIs? There's a Schwab or a Fidelity.
Yeah.
And if you do that to create the asset class, and 2, are we missing the opportunity to talk about the fact that if you give away 5% and you invest 95%, if 20% of that 5%, so 1% went to any kind of investment that stayed close to whole over 5 years because it was a social investment, that means that you need to get close to 80 basis points on your 95% better to hit the same total return. So why aren't we talking to folks about it and say, on the investment committee, look, those guys over there, if they took 20% of the money given away and they put it to work and kind of kept it close to whole or slightly diminishing with inflation, instead of trying to earn 7% in a low inflation market to keep you guys whole, you have 6.5, and you have a much better chance of perpetuating the entire endowment. And what do we flip the whole thing? So 2 big ways to get lots more capital allocated.
Thank you very much. I think it was a great last remark. The yellow session over has been lifted. And thank you very much for your optimism and your ideas. And hopefully we'll see you next year. Thank you. Thank you. תודה רבה.